Hello, my friends. I wanted to take a little time today to go over how I put this image together. A couple weeks ago, I posted a video in which I talked about how I shot the subject, so me basically, part of this image in order to place it into this background in a way that it would make sense visually and not kind of throw you off and feel a little weird. So I've had a few questions from people about how did I edit that together once I brought that image into Photoshop. So today we'll kind of take a look at how I did that. I'm not going to be able to go over every single detail of my editing process because it took several hours for me to do this and there's a lot involved in that. But we can go over the broad strokes in order to help you to understand how this is done so that you can start figuring out how to do it in your own imagery. So this is the final product that we're looking at right now, and we're going to go back to the beginning. So I'm just going to kind of turn off my groups and things here so that we can see where we started. And this is an image that I took at a beach in the Santa Cruz area, which I mentioned in the previous video. So when I took this image, I was specifically thinking about potentially adding a person here, sort of looking out on the water as a part of this rock. So that was what we talked about before. I went ahead and I shot an image of myself in which I tried to replicate the lighting in the image that we're looking at now as closely as possible. And I also took into consideration things like the angle of the shot and how the focal length and things like that will impact how the image looks and how the two images will fit together. So if you didn't watch that video, make sure that you go back and do that. So now let's talk about editing that together. So let's go through. Okay, so here is my image that I took of me, which you watched me do in the previous video. So now we're ready to take this into our new image. And what I did was I just made a pretty basic selection here. So Photoshop has a new selection tool, which is pretty helpful. If you go up here to select, you can choose subject, and it will do its best to select your subject for you. And in some instances, this works very well, like in the one that we're looking at right now. In others, it doesn't. So again, a lot of this has to do with what we spoke about in another video that I did on selections in Photoshop regarding contrast. So I'm fairly well contrasted with the background that I'm on. The background is much darker than me, my hair, my skin. There's some areas where I have shadows that are a little trickier for Photoshop. So you can see it already did a pretty good job. In order to clean this selection up, what I essentially did was go into the select and mask dialog. So there's different ways you can do that, but for now, we're going to use the keyboard shortcut, which is Option Command R. And so you'll see that it kind of missed my eye over here. So we can grab this brush, and I'm not sure if this is really small or really big. Okay, here we go. Make the brush a little bit bigger and kind of brush my eye back in there on that side. And one thing that you'll want to do when you're selecting people is make sure that you do as good of a job on selecting the hair as you can. There's also a little tool here for refine hair. I don't find that it works all that well, but let's try it and see what it does. Yeah, see, it really didn't really work that well. I feel like if I was on a totally solid white background, like we talked about before, it might have done a better job, but in this instance, it's just not going to work too well for us. So we're going to choose this other brush that's right above the one we're using, which is like the Refine Edge brush or something like that. And we're just going to kind of run it along the edge of the hair and allow Photoshop to clean it up that way. And you'll see that it does a much better job when you do it like this. It just gives it a little more sort of precision to what you're doing. And you want a little bit of the flyaway hairs. You don't want it to look like you're wearing like a hair cap, because that looks really unnatural and strange. So when you're doing a selection of a person, you need to be able to see some of those flyaway hairs. And we'll just go ahead and drag it around this side as well. So I'm not doing this super precise right now. I just kind of want to give you an idea of how it's done. And aside from that, I'm probably just going to kind of smooth the selection a little bit. So let's move me out of the way. So we'll smooth it to maybe about 30. Or sometimes what I'll do on selections of a person, because Photoshop does seem to do a pretty good job with this, is I will, instead of doing that, I'll go here to Smart Radius and I'll check that box. And then I usually bring it up to about 15 pixels or so. And Photoshop actually does a pretty good job when you do that of kind of getting the outline right. So you can see that it went a little too far in some areas. So we'll want to grab our brush again, and I'm actually just going to use the mouse for this and just kind of make sure that we're not missing part of my chin. And also I think there's a little part of my mouth here. Maybe I went too far there. Just a tiny bit. That kind of got taken out, and under the nose just a little bit. So you just kind of go in and fix anything that it maybe went a little too far with, but other than that, I think it's fine. And this backside's not going to matter too much for what we're doing because it's going to be masked out in the image. So we'll just click OK, and then we have a selection. So basically I just took this selection and I brought it over to here. Let's see, I have this, there we go. We'll do it here instead of in my actual image. So we'll just go ahead and paste that in. And that's where we start, is by doing this, just bringing our subject in. And then of course you'll want to make this a smart object. So you'll right click on it and convert to smart object. And give that a second to do that. And this is so that we will be able to manipulate this, make it bigger, make it smaller without using resolution. And also we can sort of refine this image without sort of messing up the original. So we're gonna transform it. So I'm just hitting Command T to transform and just place it in here. So this is the general process that I go through when I'm doing this. And I kind of have to figure out like where exactly do I want it? How big do I want me to be? One good way of doing this is to lower your opacity so you can kind of see the background there. So we'll lower our opacity to 50. So if you have your move tool active and you just hit the 5 on your keyboard, you will lower your opacity to 50. And if you hit 3, it'll go to 30. If you hit 8, it'll go to 80, and so on. If you want it at 100, you go 0. And you can also do in between numbers like 12 or 56 or something like that. You just have to actually type in both numbers for that. But for now, we're just going to go at 50%. And then we just figure out where we want it. How big do we want me to be? Where do we want me to sort of line up with things? I think I had myself around here maybe in the image. And then that's kind of how you begin. And then you begin the masking process. So one thing that you'll note is that, I'm going to really zoom in here so you can see, it didn't do a great job of selecting the eyelashes, and the hair it actually did a pretty decent job on, but it's not perfect. So those are things that you need to refine on your own. And another thing that we also talked about in another video that can help you with this is to create custom brushes. So what you can do is you can open your smart object by double clicking here where this little symbol is on the right corner, and that'll open your smart object. And you can go about fixing things like this. So what I did, I'm not really gonna go through the whole process right now, but I actually brushed in some eyelashes for myself. So I basically just added a new layer, and I got my brush. All you need to do is just get a soft brush, which is what we already have. And we're actually gonna wind up making it harder, but you'll want to go to shape dynamics. And here, let me move me again. I'm kind of in the way here. Okay, so shape dynamics, and you'll want to go to fade. So up here where it says control, choose fade, and then you can move your minimum diameter up, maybe to about 30% or so. And then we'll make our brush much smaller. Oops. Don't do what I just did. There we go. Okay, so we'll make our brush much smaller. And then I'll actually make it harder for this as well, which again, you can hold Control Option, and if you sort of move your mouse or your pen up, that'll make it softer. If you drag it down, it'll make it harder. So I want it a little harder, maybe around there. And smoothing, I guess, is okay. Okay, so can you see how this makes a shape? I'm going to turn off transfer actually. That is sort of like a hair. So it's thicker on one end and it kind of gets thinner on the other, right? So that's what we want. And then I zoomed in really good for this and got my brush really small. And I probably will use my mouse for this because when it's really precise like this, I just tend to have better control with it. And so you just kind of want to emulate the look of the eyelashes. So we'll want a black brush for this, right? Or better, we'll want to select the color of the eyelashes here and use that. And then you just kind of, oh, our flow is down. So I want my flow to be 100%. So I'm holding Shift and hitting 0 to make my flow 100%. And we just kind of drag out an eyelash here. And I think I could actually make my brush a little bigger. And so this is kind of the idea. I just kind of went in here and I did a much sort of more careful job of it, but I basically made myself some eyelashes since the ones that I actually have just didn't make it into the selection. And really, it's not that hard. So we already kind of have them. And then I also did some cleanup on the hair, which I actually believe I did that with a layer mask rather than doing it directly on here. So as you can see, we did that. We added our eyelashes. Now we just save this and we close it. And now you can see that our image looks a little better because now I have eyelashes. I don't look like I'm sort of weirdly cut out and missing important parts. So these are just little things that you can do to make your selections more precise. And definitely making custom hair brushes can be helpful because it can help you to clean up these areas where it just kind of is picking up some of the background still and just doesn't look quite right in the selection itself. So that's basically how we got that in there. And then I just added a layer mask to this layer. So one thing I want to point out, because I think this came up in the group recently, and I don't think everyone understands this, is you need to learn about masking. Masking is essential to building composite images. If you don't understand how to use masks, you really can't build a proper composite image. It's just not really possible. So if you want a good composite where your different images that you're bringing together blend together properly, you have to come to understand how to use masks, and they're actually really, really easy. So to add a layer mask, this is the layer that I want to add it to. This is here, let's name it so we'll know what it is. That's me. So we're going to go down here to this little symbol, and that's the add a layer mask button. So we're just going to click that. And this is our layer mask. And basically what you do on your layer mask is you paint in black to remove parts of this layer that you don't want visible, and in white to add back in parts of this image that you have your layer mask on that you want to be visible. So you can kind of go back and forth if you mess things up, and that's definitely what you do in the case of what we're doing right now. So let's go back to just a regular soft brush in a transfer mode and make it bigger again. And then we will paint on this mask. So if you don't have your default black and white colors, you just hit D. And then we want to paint in black because I want to remove, right? So we just hit X to get black. And I want, right now I'm going to leave my opacity and my flow at 100% just to kind of get rid of stuff that I absolutely know that I don't want. And then we'll go in at a lower opacity and sort of clean that up. So let's go ahead and make this a little bigger and just kind of start brushing out what we know, we absolutely know that we don't want. So we definitely want to get rid of that edge. And do you see how already I'm starting to look like I'm kind of blending into the rock here, right? And if you take out too much, you can go back with the white and then again go back with the black. So I'm just hitting X to sort of toggle back and forth between black and white. And we know we don't want that sort of bottom edge in there, right? So already we've got the beginnings of our layer mask. And what we will do to kind of just further refine it is we'll lower our flow. So I'm going to do maybe like a 30% flow. So I'm hitting Shift and 3, and you can see that that changed it to 30% flow. And then you can kind of go in here and take some more out, but you're not taking all of it out now. And what I would do is I would actually zoom in pretty close for this part, and just, I don't think I want the ear in there too much, so I'm going to mostly get rid of that. And you know, you just kind of keep going back and forth with this until you sort of find what you're looking for. So I believe if we take a look at the final image really quick, what I wound up doing was I kind of liked how the rock almost looks like it's kind of holding my head in place here, as it's got like this sort of sharp piece coming here and here. So I was just kind of trying to give it that look of that the rock was somehow like attached here and like, you know, holding me into the cliffside here. So, and the way that I did this is just through exactly what I just showed you, just going back and forth with my brush and creating a layer mask. And you can see this layer mask looks pretty crazy because it's basically just me doing this back and forth with the black and white brush until I got it to look the way that I wanted. Now, if you want to look at your layer mask, you will option click on the layer mask, and then you can see where I cleaned up the hair a bit here too. So that's another thing that I did on this layer mask. So that's where you start. You just start with getting your selection, putting that into your image, lining it up how you want, masking, doing all the masking that you're going to need to do initially. Sometimes you'll have to come back and do more depending on what all is going on, but that's the first step. And then I decided that I wanted to have some blue on me, and then also like a little bit of the orange from the rocks. And I essentially did that by just adding some color fill adjustment layers. So if you go down here to this little one that looks kind of like a circle, and you open that up and you go to solid color, that's what this is. So, and then what it'll do is it'll open up a little dialog like this where you can choose the color that you want. And what I did is I chose a color from the sky here. And then I changed the blend mode to color because I'm trying to change the color of my subject, and I also clipped this layer to the layer with me on it so that it will only apply to that layer. Because if I unclip it, let me show you here. So if I right click here and I say release clipping mask, now you can see that, here, let's turn this one off, that the whole image is being affected, right? And that's not what we want. So what you can do to add a clipping mask and make it so that it only affects the layer that it's clipped to is you can right click and choose create clipping mask. And now there you go. Now it's only on me. And that's the exact same thing that I did with the one above it. And you can see there's some masking on this one because I want me to still be blue. I wanted my face to be blue, but I wanted some of this orange color to start coming in on the shoulders and kind of these areas where the rocks are kind of coming around my head. So again, you just right click here, create clipping mask, and now it applies only to that layer. And you can stack these so that there's multiple ones clipped to the same layer. And the levels there, because of what we were doing just now, got unclipped, so we're going to reclip that. Okay, and so the levels layer was to make me blend better with my background. So as you can see, when I turn it off, I'm too bright, right? In comparison to the background and the rocks and all of that of this image, I'm really, really bright. And you need to make sure that the brightness and darkness of the different images that you're combining together also matches if you want to create a realistic composite. So that's what I was doing here. I was darkening me so that I would blend better into my background. And there's a way that you can check this. So I'll just go ahead and show you what it is. And that is to add a threshold layer. So up here in your adjustment layers, you should have one called threshold, and it's right here. So we'll just click on that. So when you do that, it's going to look really crazy and you're like, whoa, I don't want that. Well, you don't want it. The only purpose of this, and you would normally put it at the very top here, the only purpose of this is to allow you to see if the darkness and brightness of your image is making sense. So if you pull this slider all the way over here, you can see that everything sort of disappears because we don't have any detail on this side. And so here we go. As we pull it in, we can start to see where our highlights, our brightest highlights in our image start to come in. And since this image is lit by the sky, we definitely want the sky to be the brightest part of our image, right? So aside from what I'm thinking is some tiny shiny parts on rocks, which is okay, that seems that our sky is the first thing that's coming in. And see how this is all sky right here. And that's good because we want the sky to come in first. This is lighting our entire scene. And then as we start to see the highlights on me and the other parts of the image come in, we also want those to kind of come in together. So you'll see that as these sort of rocks and water here start to come up, so do I. So this is just something that you want to check to make sure that there's a consistency in the brightness and darkness of your image. And the same thing in the shadows. So when you're moving here into the shadow areas, you want to make sure that the shadows start to disappear at the same time. So for example, when I first had added myself in here and I had done a few adjustments, the shadows on me had become really dark, and they were so dark that they were staying in the image long after the shadows in the rock that I'm a part of had already disappeared. So that's not good, right? Because that means that my shadows are too dark. So I had to bring up my shadows just a little bit. So this is just another tool to help you with making sure that your composites make sense. So that's a good little tip for you if you're doing a lot of compositing. So again, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but what we'll do is we'll just kind of look at the different sections here. So once I got myself put into the image and I liked my mask and I was happy with the brightness and all of that stuff, then I added my birds. So these are some pelicans that I actually shot on this exact same day at this exact same beach. So that was pretty fortuitous, because it means that the conditions were kind of the same and the lighting was kind of the same, and it made it easy for me to make these pelicans look like they're a part of the scene. And I just thought it would be interesting, just a nice little addition to add that extra kind of believability to the image, and a little bit of a dynamic quality where, you know, you're seeing the activities of the sort of natural beach environment here. So the birds were really easy to select because they were on a fairly light sky. So the sky behind them was very, very bright, and they were much darker. So that wasn't too difficult of a selection. And again, I have a levels layer on here because I was using the threshold to sort of gauge what I thought the brightness and darkness on those pelicans needed to be to match the rest of the image. And really, as far as the compositing aspect of this image, that's it. Like, that's all it really took. It wasn't anything too complicated. I've done way more complicated composites than this one. But other than that, I just added some color. So I went into, I basically used the color range to kind of select various colors within the image and sort of individually adjust them. So that's one aspect of adjusting the color. And it's pretty subtle, but hopefully you can see it here that, oh, Photoshop's freaking out a little bit. Sorry about that. Okay, so zoom in a little bit so you can see when I turn this off and on. So I just added a little bit of brightness to this sort of orange in the rocks. I just wanted them to look a little more punchy, a little more orange. And then I also added a tiny bit of green to the water, and I did some adjustments to kind of the look of the sand and all of that. And then I did just general color adjustments, which I did using curves layers. And this is just on the entire image so that we can sort of just get an overall look to the color of the image. And then I just did some contrast adjustments, and that's it. So by and large, it's a fairly simple image. The last thing I did was I added some sharpness. And again, I don't like my images to be crazy, crazy sharp. Some people will go to a lot of trouble to do all sort of different methods of sharpening, which is fine if that's something you're interested in doing. But for me, I usually just run a pretty simple high pass adjustment on that and blend it in. So I have an action for this, so let's see if I can remember how to do it without the action. So basically what you first want to do is you don't want to flatten everything, right? Because you want to keep all your layers. What you want to do is make a merged version of everything that you have in your image thus far. So the way you do that is you hit Shift Option Command E, and that's going to create a totally merged version of your image. Then you're going to go into Filter, Filter, Other, High Pass. And I usually just keep mine set to a radius of 10. You can play around with this and see how that changes the look of the image, but I usually just keep it there. Click OK. And then you change the blend mode to soft light. And so this is just a very simple, quick way of sharpening your image. And you can see there that it definitely sharpens it up quite a bit. And then the final thing that I did, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this and turn on mine, is that I masked out a little bit of it. I didn't want it so sharp because, again, I don't like my images to be ultra, ultra sharp. So I did some masking. I made the whole thing like a 50% gray. So if you want to add a mask to a layer in order to not completely get rid of it, but just kind of partially dull it down, you can make your mask 50% gray. Another thing you can do is just drop the opacity, but this is just a way that I chose to do it. And then I also didn't really want the skin on the subject to be so sharp. So I painted out quite a bit of that. And that's pretty much it. So this is a pretty simple, straightforward composite, which is great to help you out when you're sort of first starting. And I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of how I go through the process of bringing these images together in such a way that they look natural and that everything blends properly, and just, you know, the little details of things like masking and, again, the selection process, because really masking and doing selections is probably like 75% of compositing. So you really need to learn how to use those things and use them well, and to come up with these tricks like I showed you, where I kind of painted my eyelashes in there with a brush, and I used a custom brush to kind of clean up the hair so that it looked a little better and all of that. These are all important aspects of making a good and believable composite. All right, so I will see you guys next time, and I hope that this was helpful to you. Please be sure to comment and let me know what you thought if you have any additional questions, and I will get back to you. Bye.